This is Andri, Magnasson. We're very lucky really to have Andri here. I've been doing this whole spiel about making Lewis hosting the first Icelandic presidential candidate. Roll on the next one, but here's our first one. You're also a children's writer, correct? And author of a book called Dreamland, which was very influential in Iceland. And I think we're going to touch on that at least.
Yeah.
All right, welcome, Andri. Thank you for coming.
It's great to be here to take part in this festival. So I'm gonna tell you kind of a little story about kind of how maybe society shapes an artist, how you switch roles accordingly to what you think is most needed kind of at each time. So you maybe head into some direction, but then something comes and that shapes you into another direction. So I come from Iceland, and Iceland was founded in the year 870, and it was like a completely white sheet of paper. It was just like a tabula rasa, but after like a few hundred years, this layer of stories and poems and historical events and memory was kind of piling up in Iceland, and after like 1,000 years, Iceland has been covered with up to like 2.7 meters of stories, from folklore to mythology to Icelandic sagas, and so almost everything in Iceland has like a second meaning. There is the rock on the mountain top is of course not just a rock or a geological formation, it's a troll that turned into stone, because according to troll biology they turn to stone when the sun hits their face, and so and also because of the long history that we know who settled Iceland. We know that Iceland was settled by Ingólfur Arnarson, so we know the name of the people that came first. So as a writer, you have an access to a very deep memory. You can access locally the whole history, and you can actually choose, and that's the question of being a writer, is actually choosing your subject. So the choice is very rich. You can choose from kind of known historical events and known people throughout the centuries. And then, like in my own case, I can talk to my grandfather, he's 97 years old. I can talk to my mother. And then I can also think about the future. Because if my daughter becomes as old as my grandfather, she is still alive in the year 2094. So that's basically science fiction, having children. So we have the privilege to actually understand the oldest texts that are written in Icelandic. So the language is also very rich in that way, that you can kind of have direct access to what people are thinking in the 1200s and be inspired by that, use that in many ways. Here I can give you a sample. Sigurður tók Fáfnis hjarta og steikti. What steikti is, so it's Siegfried or Sigurður. He took Fáfnis, Fáfnir is the dragon, hjarta, that's heart, og steikti á teini. He roasted it on a fire, on a stick. Og hann hugði að fullsteikt væri, fullsteikt, what do you think that is? Fully steikt, full steikt, fully roasted. He tasted the blood, and when the blood came on his tongue, he could understand bird language. So I was really inspired by mythology, folklore, and all these things. I was working one summer in that institute where I actually held this manuscript with my bare hands, and I was like starstruck having such an old thing. And this is the primal source of Nordic mythology, the inspiration for Wagner, Tolkien, and great modern kind of creations like Thor 2, for example. But my big inspirations were authors like Kurt Vonnegut and Brautigan and Borges and Bulgakov. So I was really inspired by all these big artists, but I thought I could never become a real artist because I was kind of misplaced. So I was not hipstering around in Berlin. I was not in New York. I was actually not even downtown Reykjavik. I was very normal, and I did not hang around with prostitutes and nihilists in Paris and drink absinthe. And I never shot elephants in Africa. I was just like living close to actually the ugliest place in Iceland. So I was not. So I was. You should go there if you come to Iceland. I can give you a tour. And I was kind of really depressed. I thought my life was completely over and I would never become a real artist. But then I was roaming around this parking lot, which was actually at the time the biggest parking lot in Iceland. And unlike other places in Iceland, there was no layer of history or anything. This was kind of, it was like completely barren. And that place actually doesn't even have seasons because it only has like this tarmac, and you don't see any difference between winter, summer, anything. So I was thinking, but what is the role of the artist? Is it my role to go to Paris and make yet another poem or something about Paris, about walking down Champs-Élysées or something? Isn't it my role to claim unclaimed territories, to make places that are unbearable today because they're void of poetry and make them habitable by conquering them with words and a second meaning? And I was thinking of how that had been done in Icelandic history. For example, Reykjavik was considered the worst place in Iceland until it was full of tuberculosis. It was where people were homesick. They missed their kind of countryside. They'd been moving to Reykjavik for jobs and opportunities. It was full of social problems, rats, it smelled badly, bad housing. Until a poet came and he said it might be beautiful in China, but there's nothing like holding your lover's hand down this road that had never been mentioned in a poem. And suddenly that road became the lover's lane. Lava was considered a total nuisance. Lava was not considered beautiful in Iceland. Lava in poems, a poet would say, the lava fields are wounds that we will heal. That is, they would grow a field over the lava fields. Until our painter Kjarval came, and instead of looking above the lava and painting the mountains beyond the lava fields and the blue sky, he just looked the lava straight into the eye, spread it over maybe 8 square meters of canvas, and just took lava kind of into our senses, and we came to kind of love lava. And actually people that come to Iceland, we didn't consider lava to be nature or worth anything. So I was wondering, I was roaming this supermarket, this ugliest place, and I went into the ugliest place of the ugliest place, which is the bonus supermarket. And in bonus, everything is bonus. It's bonus bread, bonus ham, bonus cola, bonus toilet paper, it's bonus everything. And I was thinking of what place this is actually, because we don't have a town square, like where everybody meets. We're suburbians, we have cars, we sit at home and watch TV. So actually bonus is the only common experience that everybody in Reykjavik has. And I was thinking how sad it is that that should be so void of any second meaning. So I thought, how would the ugliest book of poetry look like if it was in this bonus series? So I designed the cover. And I'm not sure if there are any poets. £10. £9.99 actually. It's unethical to have it 10. So I was thinking. Where was it? Yeah. So I designed the cover, and I'm not sure if there are any poets in this room. But normally poets, they design the cover first, and then they start making poems that kind of look like a cover. So after I designed the cover, I found out that bonus was not so unpoetic after all. It was divided exactly like the Divine Comedy by Dante. So you start in Paradiso, the fruit division, you go to Inferno, the meat products, and then you end up in the Purgatory, the cleaning products. And then the poems came just rushing through, almost like I had been shaking a bottle of Coke or something. And the poems didn't have names unless they were sponsored by multinational corporations. Man's primal instinct was not the hunting instinct. In ancient times, before man had spears and weapons, he roamed the prairies and he was gathering. He was gathering roots and he was gathering fruits and eggs and nuts and self-dead animals. I, the modern man, I can feel how the primal man breaks forth as I race with the cart and I gather and gather and gather. My grandfather was 70% water. He was 70% the stream that trickled past his farm. He was 30% the sheep that grazed on his mountain. He was a fish swimming in his lake. He was a cow eating in his field. He was a stream. He was the grass, the mountain, and the lake. I am not 70% water, perhaps 15% mineral water. The rest is beer and Coca-Cola. An Italian pasta, Swiss cheese, Danish pork, and Chinese rice. American ketchup runs through my veins. You are what you eat. I'm a miniature of the world. No, I'm a miniature of bonus. And this poem is scientifically proven because our body changes every element, every molecule, every cell, every 5 years. Only maybe just one string of a spinal nerve or something remains. Everything else is new. So we will have vanished and become something else. So if you shop in bonus for 5 years, then everything you are came home in a yellow plastic bag and became you, which is beautiful. You could actually call it mother bonus. So I can finish this book. It was kind of almost like a literary tract, but it had this deeper meaning that we actually needed a second angle in bonus, and also that poetry maybe had to step down from the ivory tower and just go down into the dirt. It was also I also wanted to experiment because all my friends were going into universities to become lawyers or MBAs or businessmen or something, to work for somebody that would sell something through bonus. But I was supposed to be an outsider. I was supposed to frown upon modern times. I was supposed to be anti-capitalist. But I was thinking, why can't I just go full force in this? Like my role models, Beckham and Britney, they would do sponsorships with Pepsi. Why can't I just go all the way, full force, and make consumer poetry? And so I took the book to the owner of Bonus, to his headquarters, and he really liked the cover. So he published the book. And, oh, sorry, it's my access here. Here it is. Yeah. So he published the book, and it was sold on an eternal special offer by the counter. And you got one copy free if you bought 30 kilos of pork. And I signed the same deal with the owner of Bonus as the juice producer and all the subcontractors that were squeezed to make products for them. So I signed that if the consumer is harmed by the product, then the producer, me, is liable to this and that law. So if you feel dizzy or stupid or something after this reading, you can sue me. So this was kind of a prank, and I was kind of making fun of Bonus, but it became a huge bestseller. It sold hundreds of kilos, I think. And I was kind of making fun of the monster, but in the end, I was just kind of channeling lots of goodwill and good branding for Bonus. So it was like in these manga series where you throw a bomb at the monster and the monster just takes in the bomb and grows. So I was thinking what I wanted to do next. I didn't want to do Bonus Poetry 2, and I was thinking just about things that I wanted to make something inspiring. I had a child, and I was really thinking about children's literature, and I was reading a thinned out version of Winnie the Pooh for my son. So Winnie the Pooh, he caught a fish, and the fish looked at Winnie the Pooh and he said, "Don't eat me, Winnie the Pooh." So Winnie the Pooh, he released the fish and roasted a hot dog instead. Because everybody knows a hot dog is not an animal. Their grandmothers, that they had learned from their grandmothers, and it was literally like listening to a 300-year-old lady. It was beautiful. And the songs were so bizarre. It was because in Iceland, we tried to become like a Central European nation, high cultural, so we tried to get opera singers and all these proper Central European things, but we erased our folklore history. So the rímur, which was the most popular art form in Iceland for 600 years, was so lost that I had never heard it even after, when I started university. The rímur sounds something like this. It's Brandin góma brassum hljóð brúði fróma gleðja þar sem róman stranga stóð stínur róma beðja. And it's like 50 more verses, and it goes just endlessly, this really bizarre type of singing, and it's basically all about people chopping heads off each other. So it's kind of like Tolkien in verse sung this way. And then I was listening to these lullabies because I was kind of bored with the children's books that my son was reading, and or I was reading for my son, and because Little Red Riding Hood, she went to the forest, and the wolf locked the grandmother in a closet, and I was like, no, he was supposed to eat her. And then he locked Riding Hood in the closet, and then the hunter came and said, "Shame on you, wolf, you have to let them out of the closet." So he said sorry, and he opened the closet. And I was like, trying to read this book for my son, and I was like, they were supposed to eat him, and there was lots of terrible stuff supposed to happen. And then I was listening to these old ladies, and there was a song like, "There was a child in the valley that fell into a hole, and in the hole there was a monster. The monster took the child and banged it on the ice, banged it once and banged it twice." And then the song was like 20 verses about body parts flying out of the child. And this woman was maybe born 1880, and you could really feel her giggling through the headphones. How funny she thought this was. She was like 90 years old when she was singing it. And you could really feel the privilege of her grandchild crawling into her bed, and your grandmother would say something really horrible. But and it would create this beautiful bond between generations. So I was thinking of, I really wanted to make a good children's book, and I was thinking of everything that inspired me most when I was a child. Like when I went north to my grandfather's farm, that was in the poem. And you would get this culture shock of them eating everything. They would have a pot full of 10 types of birds, and they would eat a seal, and they would catch lots of fish. And so they were always killing something. And they were like wild children there every summer. And I was, and my grandfather, he actually said he would eat everything that could run, fly, or swim. And if he laid on his back, a bird would come and lay an egg in his mouth. And there they have like a magical beach where all sorts of strange things would float ashore. You would have a mine from the Second World War, a computer screen maybe, and you could get sea mail. And actually, the reason why I'm here is exactly this beach, because I found a message in a bottle on the beach. And it was from a man in Trefonen in close to Wales. So we've been in contact for like since 2001, and I've always been on my way to have a reading there. And finally had the reading in his village hall last yesterday. So yeah, it was a pretty story. So it was, this bottle was put into the sea between Scotland and the Shetland Isles, the 8th of August 2000, by Andri. He was a young single man at the time. And I think he was a bit disappointed when I called, because he was hoping it would float to the Riviera or something. And this date, August 2000, comes strangely close to the launch of his film here. So this was me. And then we met actually in the year 2007 first. His name is Andri, my name is Andri, and we met on St. Andrew's Day. So it should have been a romance or something, but it's just a friendship. So yeah, I was just thinking, so again, this is just from that beach, this magical beach, and I was thinking of everything that inspired me. Also my Uncle John, he was like a really big role model for me. He had crocodiles on his brain, and he had a big boa constrictor in his bedroom, and because he had crocodiles on his brain as a child, he became a crocodile specialist, and he had just invited me to come and help him to do research on the mating habits of the anaconda snake in Venezuela. He was doing like the primal research, and it was about going through swamps, finding like a hole in the riverbank or in the swamp bank, putting your hand in the hole, and when you felt something slippery, you're supposed to grab it and then pull it out. And so this was very tempting, but then I got pregnant, or my wife got pregnant, and it's maybe not the first thing that you do when you get pregnant is to go and wrestle anaconda snakes. And then I had some strange family stories also, because this Uncle John's father, Björn, my grandfather, he became a surgeon in New York, and he operated on Oppenheimer, the father of the nuclear bomb, as chief surgeon in the New York hospital. And I was like starstruck that my grandfather had actually operated on a mythological character, that is, like a contemporary mythological being. Like Prometheus went to the highest mountain and came down with fire and gave it to humans, and he was punished by an eagle that gnawed out his liver, which is quite uncomfortable, I think. So I was asking my grandfather, because Oppenheimer went into the smallest material and came out with something bigger than a volcano, and handed that over to the crazy leaders of the world to terrorize us forever. So I asked my grandfather if Prometheus was punished by an eagle. My grandfather's name is Björn, which means bear. What did the bear do to Oppenheimer in future mythology, like after 1,000 years when it's kind of been simplified? And he said, "Oh, I think it was hemorrhoids." But when Oppenheimer was on the operating table, the image of Christ kind of flashed into his eyes. He was exactly like the image of Christ on the altar in his old church where he was born in the Westfjords of Iceland. And I went to that church, and I saw actually he wasn't so far away from it. So I was thinking of mythology, I was thinking about possibilities to destroy the planet, I was thinking about crocodiles, I was thinking about my grandparents, I was thinking about just basically everything. And I was also kind of worried about the future, because I just had a child, and I started to develop this story here, which is called The Story of the Blue Planet. And this is a story about wild children living on a blue planet far out in space, and they're completely free and they can do whatever they want. And nobody knows why only children live on this planet, because scientists don't like children so much, and they haven't done any research on this planet. But these children are completely free, they're just wild children, they can eat whatever they want. But one day, two children, they see this shooting star, and seems like a rocket is crashing on the beach, and out comes this dark, mysterious creature. And they run around and they scream, "A space monster's arrived." But then actually it's not a space monster, it's just this person here. It's the coolest guy in the world. And his name is Jolly Good Day. And he doesn't understand why the children can live this boring life on this planet. You know, why don't you do something fun? And he teaches them how to fly by flicking the dust off the butterflies' wings. And if they take enough dust from the butterflies, then they can fly while the sun shines. And then life becomes really great, but then the night becomes boring. They want to fly during the night, so they ask him, "Can you fix the night?" And he thinks he can fix the night, so he takes a big hammer and a nail, and he fixes the sun in the sky, so the sun will shine forever on the children. But then the clouds come, and the clouds are quite annoying, so they ask him, "Can you fix the clouds and get rid of the clouds?" So it makes this big wolf that circles the horizon and keeps the sky forever clear. But then two children are blown by the wind and they land on the other side of the planet. And the other side of the planet is completely dark. And the children are running through this dark and dying forest looking for a way to get home. So I took like 2 or 3 years in writing this story because I thought it could be a powerful, good story if I would put all my effort into it. And it's actually been published in almost 35 languages now. And the play has been performed in about 12 big stages worldwide. One of the cutest performances is this one here, which is in Nirit in Iran, which is a town of maybe 30,000 people. And actually, I was communicating with them on Instagram, and they were experiencing 50 degrees of summer heat the summer they put out this play. So I had kind of I'm establishing that I have like a career of being a children's book author. It was kind of obvious, but things were getting kind of strange, and my next book was actually science fiction that children can't understand, called Love Star, and it's kind of like some kind of a Black Mirror world, but I wrote it before Black Mirror. And then after I had done this kind of sci-fi novel, things were getting even more strange in Iceland, and I started to wonder if we actually needed more fantasy, because the reality of Iceland was becoming some kind of a fantasy. So the owner of Bonus, that had signed a deal of bonus poetry just a few years before, like this must be like 2005 or something, not even 10 years before, he owned this yacht here, he owned this private jet here, he owned this bank here, and it was going to expand to become like this. He owned Hamley's toy store in London, he owned Topshop, he owned House of Fraser, he owned half of London's high street actually. And when he went bankrupt, his bankruptcy was half the GDP of Iceland. And when his bank went down, his bankruptcy was the 7th biggest bankruptcy in capitalist history. And you see, Enron is here, but his bank is here. So suddenly, just by roaming my local supermarket parking lot, I was actually much closer to the world events than I would have been if I had been in Paris or New York or something else. So I was actually witnessing the people that were players in huge economic events on a global scale. And you could see how the financial system was channeling money infinitely through these alpha figures when they showed the confidence of being able to take over company after company after company, and suddenly a single individual had under himself half the GDP of Iceland, and that of course had to be refinanced, but when Lehman Brothers went down and the money stopped flowing, then the crash was huge. So at this time, I thought it was maybe more interesting, instead of doing sci-fi or children's book, it would be more interesting just to try to understand reality. Because reality was something that I didn't understand, and if you want to make fantasy, it's better to have some kind of a reality to stand on, to know what is fantasy and reality. And I thought also that the times were getting quite interesting, because suddenly you had seen like 2 ideologies. I was not 40 at the time, and still I had seen like 2 ideologies in my lifetime kind of collapse in front of my eyes. So here's the headquarters here's where Reagan and Gorbachev met, and is a symbolic place for the fall of communism. Next door is the 4th biggest bankruptcy in capitalist history. So, and when an ideology like that collapses, the language becomes free. There's so much language and so many ways of telling us how reality is, how to do things, what is real, what is valuable. And it's really interesting when the language suddenly dissolves in front of your eyes. And I was lying in this bush here between, and I was just wondering what ideology is next. And I've been writing this book here, Dreamland, a self-help manual for a frightened nation. And in this book, was trying to just understand reality and try to look at these examples that I could find locally to understand bigger forces in the world. So we had, for example, this military base in Iceland, and the Cold War was over, and Americans had different technologies and they didn't need a base in Iceland anymore. And they were doing the stuff in Iraq, so they also wanted to cut down and move some of their forces elsewhere. So they wanted to close down the base. But Icelanders, at the time, we were in the height of our economic boom. We did not want them to close down the base. And the Americans asked, but who's your enemy? And we said, it's not Germany anymore, and Russia isn't going to do anything. We have different strategies to deal with that. They said, who's your enemy? We said, there is hope. We might have enemies in the future. And what we actually needed was exactly these 4 F-15 fighter jets that needed exactly this infrastructure, that exactly employed these 1,000 people in a local village. And all the language, and I thought that was so interesting, all the language was about people being weak, uncreative, and vulnerable. So it was all about the poor people working in the base, and that the base could not, in any circumstances, leave. And the language was all about how social problems would escalate, how people would start hitting each other, and all these horrible things that would happen. And it was all about people being a product of the base. So first comes the base, and then comes the people, but not the people as a force that creates the base and keeps it running. And there was nobody looking at that a creative person in the base actually can't grow, because that's all defined from somewhere else. Mm. So it was all about how people were vulnerable and how necessary it was to keep exactly that system going. And suddenly we were proving Eisenhower's final speech about the global military-industrial complex, that when you start to make something, you can't stop. So the goal was not to have built a base and to have defended us, but to be defending us always, even after the threat is over. So I thought if world peace would spread around the planet, that we were showing that if we can't close down a base, who can close down a base? Who wants fewer jobs in their local weapon factory? Who wants to minimize the economic activity in their nearby base weapon facility or whatever they're making in all this huge wasteful complex? So I thought if we would see that we would see headlines all around the world if world peace would spread suddenly like some kind of an anti-zombie virus or something, we would see headlines like this: world peace threatens local economy. And there was another thing that we had that was even more disturbing, is that this was in the year 2000 and something, which I thought was kind of the future. And we were having a debate over the future of Þjórsárver. Icelandic names are not very good for international campaigns. But Þjórsárver is the greatest nesting place of pink-hooded geese in the world. So a whole species relies on that place. And the government wanted to flood that area, or the national energy company wanted to flood that area, and actually had wanted to flood it since the 70s. And it was not because we needed energy as a nation or as homes or businesses. It was actually that need had been fulfilled a long time ago. The need was because they wanted to build an aluminum smelter, and that aluminum smelter looks something like this. One aluminum smelter uses energy like 1 million people. So actually that area was not supposed to power all the smelter. That area would have been enough to power maybe the first 500 meters of this pot line. So they would need other rivers and other areas to kind of fill the whole smelter. And suddenly, as a writer, I was thinking, there's nothing that I could create myself out of my writing or as an artist. There's nothing that I could do out of my own head that would be more valuable than an area like that. And actually, maybe my talent would be better served of trying to protect that area, and then I can just write something later, than because nothing that I could do would equal that. And we were showing here that the solution is sometimes a problem. In 1996, that is, which is a goal that Paris and everybody is trying to reach. We were only waiting for cars and airplanes and ships to have some kind of a cleaner technology than oil, but everything that we could do ourselves was already clean, renewable energy. So we were kind of like an energy utopia. But we had lots of talented engineers, and we had lots of rivers that are called natures by some, but still untapped resources by others. So the government, and the only way to build a dam or build more dams in Iceland was to get some power-intensive industry to Iceland. But actually there are very few 50 megawatt factories or 70 megawatt factories. Almost the only industry that is energy intensive enough was the aluminum industry. So suddenly, as a citizen, you had to start to understand something that normal people elsewhere don't try to understand or don't need to worry about. And the problem in Iceland is that beauty in Iceland is power. That is, the most beautiful areas in Iceland are also the most powerful ones. So the government gave out this brochure here in 1996, lowest energy prices, and suddenly as a citizen, again, you had to start to try to understand language that you would normally not try to understand. So like a word like this, economically harnessable hydropower with relatively little environmental impact is estimated at 30 terawatt hours a year. And normally you're afraid of something like that, 30 terawatt hours a year. If I was in a TV debate and I would say, Þjórsárver, it's so beautiful, it's green, it's lovely, I walk there and I want to write poetry about pink-footed geese. And then the engineer next to me in the suit, he would say 30 terawatt hours a year, economic growth, job creation, welfare system. Then everybody would see, you know, oh, Andri, he's so cute, he's so sensitive. But this man, he knows what he's saying, you know, he's the man, you know. And I'm the derivative of his, you know, expertise. So I decided, okay, if we have so much energy, why are we discussing Þjórsárver, which is a Ramsar and should be a UNESCO site? Why are we already there if we have so many areas with relatively little environmental impact? So what does it mean when somebody says 30 terawatt hours? And this was repeated everywhere. This was in the brochures, this was in foreign media, this was in the mouth of the parliament, of the president, the newspapers, everybody was just repeating this. And I thought, has nobody actually deconstructed that and told us what is behind those 30 terawatt hours? And I thought terawatt hours was something that I would have to need to go to university to understand, something like a logarithmic algebra thing. But actually it was the only math that I needed was I needed to be able to do 1.7 plus 2.5. That was the math that I had to do. So because the rivers in Iceland have been estimated, so they know that one river is 1.5, which is the energy it can produce over a year. Another might be 3, another might be 4, another might be 1.2. So if I would take the rivers of the north, and again, I just picked all the rivers I was not thinking of without damaging the environment because they're all beautiful. And take iconic waterfalls, even like this one in northern Iceland, and I would take the big rivers of East Iceland and the beautiful areas in the Central Highlands. And I would add it up. Then in the year 2002, Iceland had harnessed 2 river systems of maybe 12 or 15 major river systems. And already only about 30% of that went to domestic use, most of it, the other went to aluminum smelters. So to reach 30 terawatt hours, we not only needed to dam every river in Iceland, we need to dam a little bit more than every river in Iceland. And suddenly this was fun. It was strangely fun that because I was always called an extremist. I was always against progress. I was always stupid. I was always, didn't know what I was saying. And suddenly I went into the official speak of the government, and I found out that they were just stark raving mad. and I was wondering, how can it be that you go through a university and okay, you learn electrical engineering, but why do you want to do this? And why do you want to sell all that to corporations that were doing horrible things all over the planet at the time when they sent this brochure? We're talking about Russian aluminum, Rio Tinto, Billington. We're talking about these big mining companies that have been doing terrible things in just, you name it, where they would set themselves down, tax relief, infrastructure, loans from the local government, and extraction of all the resources straight into their pockets. So why should somebody want this? And actually at that time, we were also having artists like the artist ladies here that were actually taking, also deconstructing the images of the highlands. That is, by taking people on walks. That is, instead of filling a gallery with an installation about the highlands, they decided there's no more inspiration that we could do than take people actually there and deconstruct the image that you had to be some kind of a Gore-Tex hero to go into the highlands, that you can also be you can walk there in the summer in a good dress, and you can be a child, and you can be an old person, and an old person could find himself there. And these pictures here are actually of a place that the government said was ugly, and that there was nothing there. So we were also kind of witnesses to great destruction. This was one of the most remote areas in Iceland. Very few people had been there, but they, instead of being holy because there's nobody there, they turned it around in the newspeak. Oh, because nobody's there, it must be unpopular. So instead of being untouched where nobody is, no, this is a very unpopular area. And then again came the rhetorics that I was told that this was our ethical thing. That is, we're facing global warming, and we need to harness as much clean energy as possible to get the industries to be powered by hydro or geothermal or wind power. So this was what we had to do, and this was our contribution to the big kind of agreements, was to power smelters and make industries in the world more clean. So again, I had to try to understand things. So because I had no idea what aluminum is, and we know that the government wanted to sell all the energy in the east to Alcoa, again all the energy in the north to Alcoa except one river, and then most of the available energy in the southwest corner to two smelters. And this was not like a possibility. This was something they presented as the unavoidable sacrifice we had to make to become like a thriving, rich nation. My idea was that you could actually sacrifice the nature and the economy, which would be like an Aesopian tale. So, of course, the aluminum companies had enormous propaganda machines going on, and I started to just do some very simple research of what happens to aluminum, which quite a lot of it goes to packaging. Aluminum is extremely energy intensive, that is, it takes 30 times more electricity to make 1 ton of aluminum than 1 ton of steel. So if you want to make a chair, you can make 1 chair from aluminum or 30 chairs from steel. This is one of the things that I know Mr. Lowenstein has been looking into, is what's behind the materials that we use. In America, they throw away about 1 million tons of cans, only cans, unrecycled annually. And that is like they would take the total commercial air fleet and throw it away 4 times a year. That is totally insane destruction of nature. So I was always told, you're a poet. You're not part of reality. A factory is reality. That's where money is made and created. Those are real jobs with machines, and then that money goes into the economy, and then we can pay poets to make poetry. So is that reality to drink something unhealthy, like the primal need to drink something unhealthy from a can and throw away that can? That is reality that creates poetry as a derivative. The problem is that the raw material is coming from Brazil, Jamaica, and Australia, not from Iceland. The bauxite, which is washed, which is kind of like a valuable aquifying earth under rainforests, kind of old rainforest soil in the tropical areas, and they have to strip mine rainforest to get and extract that. They have to rinse it with caustic soda, and out come 3 tons of red mud, and then 1 ton of this white powder.
6 tons.
6 tons. Okay, they're probably into less valuable resources now. So, 6 tons of red mud, and you could see that in Jamaica they also had very ambitious engineers that had kind of mapped the surface of Jamaica, and I thought this was suddenly like an excellent, beautiful example of how we are destroying the planet. That is Jamaica being scraped up, Iceland being plundered for the primal need of somebody to throw away a can because they can't put a proper legislation or a proper system that makes a cradle-to-cradle thing in America. So I was like asking these people, okay, before I give up Þjórsárver, the greatest nesting place of pink-footed geese, I would maybe ask them to pass one legislation in America and maybe just throw away half of the commercial air fleet every year. And the problem is also that Jamaicans want to do this. That is, they don't want this to stop. Because if this stops, then Jamaica goes bankrupt, or they will have a very bad economic times in Jamaica. So Jamaicans are addicted to gnawing up their land, and eventually, of course, they will have depleted the resource, and they will have to recreate themselves. And recreating yourself on a depleted land is much more difficult than on a relatively healthy ground. But while they have not hit the wall, there's a tendency to go on. Icelanders were very willingly wanted to have demand for electricity. That is, so we were also quite okay with the aluminum being thrown away because we wanted to build a dam and have the economic activity to sell them power, and we didn't really care what happened to the end product. And I created this pseudo theory, and the engineers in Iceland, they did not just want to make one dam, they always wanted to be making dams. So in the end, these engineers, or one maybe floor of talented people, would finish Iceland in like a span of 20, 30 years. So I created this pseudo theory, which is called, you cannot build one pyramid. That is, the pseudo theory was, why are the pyramids in Egypt 3? And I made this kind of hypothesis that I can bet without checking. I bet that there were not 500 years between the pyramids. I bet they were all built in one crazy time. That is because the theory is it's not possible to build one pyramid. If you have 40,000 people for 40 years building a pyramid, you don't stop. Because the economy is about doing that. The supply chain from the lowest slave to the highest architect to the people feeding them, to the people making the ropes, to people, just the whole system, the whole culture is about where you are in the hierarchy of building a pyramid. And if the pharaoh would not want to build another pyramid, they would just get themselves a new pharaoh that wants another bigger pyramid. So after building pyramids for 80 years, of course you don't stop. That's just what we've always done. It's grandfather. It's just this is what we do. And the idea was that maybe after 3 pyramids, some people can get cynical. And they're like wondering, what use is a pyramid? It doesn't even cast a shade. And they hear rumors from priests that actually only half of them are slaves. And they just go to these amphitheaters and watch tragedies and drink wine and olives and stuff like that. So I'm not actually sure how that ended in Egypt. I didn't do formal research, but I think we're actually on a state of being close to the cynical now in our Western world of wondering, how many pyramids are we going to build? So I ended up doing this writing this book for almost 4 years and making a documentary film for a documentary film that is, there's no sound here, it doesn't matter. Yeah, so I made the documentary film, that is, I made the book, and then I became like an accidental filmmaker because they started making a documentary film, but I was kind of drawn into the process and I became a co-director of the documentary. And if you send me an email, I can send you a secret link to the documentary if you want to watch it. So after that, I was completely burned out because my body thought I was in a war or something. My heart went out of beat, and all sorts of. I lost my sense of humor and everything. So the economic crash was a real relief because suddenly they didn't have any money to build dams, and I could write my next book, which was going to start writing in the year 2002, and it's coming out in English next year. It's called The Casket of Time. It's about a mad king that has conquered the world, and he thinks it's really unfair that he doesn't get more time than other people. That he won't have time to drink all his wines or sleeping on his castles, and his beautiful princess will just grow old and die like any other worthless peasant. So it demands a solution, but of course nobody can solve it until some dwarves come with something that looks like a glass casket, but it's not made of glass, it's woven with spider silk, and it's so densely woven that time cannot penetrate the walls. So when he closes the casket and opens a week later, the princess feels like only 1 second passed. So he can remove all the worthless days from her life. Imagine your existence. You look into your life and you wonder what happened to my days, and 1/7 of your life was Monday. Which is really depressing. And 1/6 of your life was February and November, and Brexit debates. So he can give the princess only the days that really matter, but of course that goes wrong. The interesting thing is that, and then after that, I thought things, and we used the crisis to create like a counter narrative. So we had like a campaign about the Icelandic Highland National Park. Þjórsárver has been protected now, so we actually won that debate. And we, instead of being always on the defensive, always kind of defending this river and that river and the other river, we just drew a circle around the areas in Iceland that are currently untouched or undisturbed. And we said, this is Iceland like it is. This is Iceland like we like having it. And we should just make it a formal national park and stop arguing about it, stop destroying it. So this campaign has been kind of growing in the last years. So my next project was kind of about my grandmother, because my grandmother is really cool. She's 94, and she was kind of one of the first women in Iceland to fly, and she got to know my new grandfather because my other grandfather went to America, and they went on a honeymoon on Europe's biggest glacier. And she was kind of one of the first women that was allowed to go on such a trip, because a glacier was not considered a place for a woman. So they were 4 weeks, and this was kind of the founding trip of the Icelandic Glaciological Society. That is, founding trip of mapping and measuring this glacier. And This glacier, these trips were of course really great and dramatic, and my grandfather took lots of pictures, and they had severe storms and they were stuck in the tent for 3 days, and I asked my grandfather, weren't you cold? And he said, cold, we were just married. And I was 11 when I asked him, I was like, how do you get warm when you get married? I didn't understand that. And the glacier was basically an unnamed, unclaimed territory also. So actually the highest peak on the eastern part of the glacier is called the Bride's Belly. So after my grandmother, it's the 13th highest peak in Iceland. So I was going through this research when I was invited to interview the Dalai Lama. So I come like quite suddenly into this story. And I was wondering, what can I ask a person that has reincarnated 14 times? You know, it has to be a really, intellectual question. And I was just browsing through everything in my mind. I was reading everything. I was just wondering, okay, what can I ask? Because I had a whole hour to talk to him. And then my mind went into Nordic mythology. So in Nordic mythology, the world started with a cow. It was a frozen cow. And from the udders of this frozen cow came these 4 milky rivers that nourished the world. And it made no sense, actually. It sounds like a whispering game that went wrong, like some kind of misunderstanding through 500 years and 5 languages or something. But then I was kind of looking into Hindu and Indian mythology, and there they have Kamadhenu, which is kind of this, and the name of the cow is Auðhumla, or it means the humla of prosperity. And it doesn't make any more sense. But then they have this cow in India, Kamadhenu, this sacred cow, and it's the cow, a source of prosperity. And the interesting thing was the legs of the cow, the foundation of the cow, are the Himalayas. It stands on the Himalayas, the cow, mother cow of prosperity. And when we went to the Himalayas, I could see that the Nepal section of the Great Himalayan Trail ends in Humla, at the border of Tibet. And I was like, wow, that's interesting, it's like the same name. And then if you follow that Himalayan Trail, you will find Mount Kailas. And there you will find the most sacred mountain in the world, the throne of Shiva and the center of the universe according to Buddhists. And from there would come the 4 major rivers of Asia, Indus, Ganga, Brahmaputra. And the source of the Ganga, in the same region, or in the Himalayas, is a glacier called Gomukh, and that means the mouth of the cow. And I was like, wow, this is, of course, it makes total sense. A frozen cow. It's a metaphor for a glacier. It gives out this milky white water, and it's better than water. It's full of silt and crushed rocks, and it's like a fertilizer for the crop downstream. It accumulates snow when you don't need the water, and it gives you the water exactly when you need it the most. So, and if you look at the Himalayan range, and we were seeing this also before in the other speeches, then it is still this milking cow of Asia. And in the speech, the Dalai Lama was worried about the changing of these glaciers, the receding of them, and the changing waterways, the flash floods, but also just the basic vanishing of glaciers that they expected global warming would not reach in such height. And he referred to Icelandic glacier science because they haven't had these regular measurings of the Himalayan glaciers to understand how long or how they actually react to global warming. But the Icelandic glaciers have been measured for 60 years, and we can understand how the major glaciers in the Central Highlands will actually vanish within the year 2120 according to current temperature, not according to rising temperatures. And this is nature leaving geological speed, entering human speed. When my grandparents traveled over the glaciers, they were eternal. That is, they had always been there and they would always be there. when they were traveling over the glacier, they were kind of on the exact spot when humans met the highest peak of CO2 concentration in a few hundreds of thousands of years. Now we have far exceeded that limit. And when you travel over these glaciers, it's almost unbelievable that such huge bodies of ice and nature can actually be so vulnerable. But actually they're not leaving with a bang, they're not leaving like with dramatic coloring ice into the waves. It's just like a silent spring, just slowly going very silently, and they're kind of strangely dead, the ends of the glaciers, instead of being like thriving on some kind of strength. So I think one of the big and the interesting thing is that when a universal faculty makes something like this, the same faculty will maybe produce an engineer or a businessman or somebody that makes something like this. So this is a graph of aluminum production in the world. And in the year 1998, it was 22 million tons, and that was already a quite destructive force. In 2005, it had grown to 32 million tons, and there we knew all the warning signs were already blinking. And where do you set your goal after you know that you have hit the wall, after you know that the climate is rumbling, the resources are depleting, the waste is too much? Why don't we double in 15 years what grew so harmfully in 100 years? So this detachment is, I think, one of the fundamental things that we have to address, is how can the same institution measure the vanishing of glaciers and produce people that shamelessly make something like this, without taking the other into consideration. But the more alarming things are if you look at other data and how we are on kind of an infancy stage in the talk about global warming. Because of course the CO2 does not only melt the glaciers, 30% of it is taken up by the oceans. And I was looking into when the word ocean acidification was first mentioned in Icelandic media. That was in the year 2006. So it was once mentioned in the year 2006, it was once mentioned in 2007, it was never mentioned in the year 2008, and it was twice mentioned in the year 2009. So how deep is the discussion and how serious is that issue? Yeah, basically it is about the pH of the oceans reaching a level that we have not seen in 30 million years. And nobody actually knows what kind of an ocean a 7.7 or 7.8 ocean is. Nobody actually knows what happens to the microorganisms that are kind of the founding elements of life of the oceans and also maybe the rest of the planet. What we know is that an ocean that is 7.7 or 7.8 is an ocean that is undersaturated in terms of argonite, which is the building material of shells and plankton. And an undersaturated ocean tends to dissolve, that is, an oversaturated ocean tends to create corals and to create shells because the energy tends to seep into organisms. An undersaturated ocean tends to dissolve corals and dissolve shells. So the idea in my work now about time and water, because of course we also know what will happen to the glaciers when they melt. The idea is that we are detached from time. That is, when a scientist says 2100, we don't feel related to the date. We don't feel any kind of emotional reaction when we see that date. So when I have like lectures for 20-year-olds, which are people starting university, I ask them often a very simple question. When is somebody still alive that you will love? It's an extremely simple question. And then they say maybe 2070. I'm like, no, you're born 2000. You're gonna run your last Ironman in your 70s. You would probably be a cool 90-year-old, and at that time you might have a soulmate, which might be your descendant or somebody around you, that is born in the year 2070, somebody that you've known from infancy into being a fully matured human being. And when is that person still talking about you as their major influence in their life? That is in the year 2160. In my case, the person that I will know and love the most in my life is still alive in the year 2140. So the idea is that we have to adapt to time as a metaphor in a different way, that we have to see when we see the year 2100, we shouldn't think about Blade Runner or some kind of stupid future fiction. We should just think, oh, this is only halfway in the goal of my life, in my innermost chain. So the time that belongs to us is a time of somebody we know and love versus the time of somebody that we will know and love. And that's, in my case, like 1924 to 2140. For my son, it's 2160. And actually, you can decide to write out an event. That is, I do this experiment with the 20-year-olds, that they should just plan like an evening in the year 2160. What food to be eaten, what music, what films to watch, and then they can prepare that event for 20 years with this individual, so that individual will really remember to execute that in the year 2160. My Uncle John, he had crocodiles on his brain, and became a crocodile specialist, but he died from malaria because he was going through very dangerous malaria-infected regions. But 2 years after he died, they found a big skeleton in Kenya, which was the greatest crocodile species that has ever roamed the planet. And the crocodile species got his name, Crocodylus Magnasson, because his team actually saved a whole species of crocodiles from extinction. That is, individuals could actually do that. So we not only have to think about dates like 2160, but we need kids that have birds and fish and monkeys and everything on their brain, and we have to kind of adapt to a new date in our kind of innermost state up to 2130 or something like that. Thank you very much.
Country of storytellers.